Welcome to What's the Scenario with PLRB, where we explore claims and coverage scenarios relevant to insurance professionals. I'm Alicia Watley.
I'm Tim Havler.
And I'm Mike Broad.
So, Tim, what's the scenario?
Adjuster receives a claim for $500,000 worth of stolen NFTs.
Whoa.
The insured states these 5 NFTs were part of the Bored Ape Yacht Club collection and were worth $100,000 apiece at the time of the loss. The insured had clicked on a malicious link in a web browser, which instantly transferred his NFTs to the thief's account. He called the police, but they were not optimistic about the chances of recovery. NFTs are digital and anonymous. He's now claiming the NFTs were personal property under his homeowner's form, and he should recover as much as coverage C will allow under his homeowner's form. So who wants to take a stab at what an NFT is?
I don't know. I'm going to be right up front. I'm that old lady who doesn't know what an NFT is and how it's different from any clip art I can do.
Okay, Mike.
I think it was an old logistics thing, not for tracking. Is that correct?
Say more.
Oh, I don't know. I have no clue what it is,
I
Tim,
see.
so that was a
Okay.
horrible guess, and it's wrong, I'm sure. What is an NFT?
I was trying to give you as much credit as I could there.
Oh, please don't.
Okay, an NFT, I would say the best description is it's a digital certificate of ownership. And it resides on something called the blockchain, but we don't need to get into that today.
That's a whole other monster.
That's a whole other thing. So the best analogy I like to make here is to the art world. So say you have a Picasso and you have the original Picasso and it's hanging on your wall and it's worth a ton. So you have not only possession of that Picasso, but you are the true owner of it. But anyone can really make a copy of that Picasso and put it in an art textbook, or make a poster and put it on their own wall. You could probably make a poster so good that no one other than an art appraisal expert could ever even tell the difference. So this problem exists even more in the digital world. So now let's imagine we have a digital piece of art. Alicia, like you said, I think we all know how to right-click Save As.
Yes.
And put a perfect copy of that on our computer. And now not only an art appraisal expert can't even tell the difference. Maybe a IT forensics person could really look into it, but just digital copying, it's so ubiquitous, and everything is an exact copy of everything before it. So an NFT now is a way to certify the first and the original. So you can own this NFT, which means in some sense, you are the owner of that original. So just like you have the Picasso, now you can say, I have the NFT for this. I will confess, I do own a couple of NFTs myself, not because I think they're going to skyrocket in value, but just because I thought they were cool and I wanted to support the artist. So does that explanation make some sort of sense?
Yes. No one's explained it like that, so thank you.
Okay, good.
Hey, I know you don't have to share with our podcast viewers out there, listeners, but care to share what your NFTs are, Tim?
They are brilliant pieces of artwork.
Excellent.
And I think I will stop there.
Okay.
Very good.
Oh, you don't want to tell us how much they cost? No, I'm just kidding. I'm
just kidding. Yeah, or how much they cost now.
They're priceless to you. Okay.
They're priceless to me. Yeah. So I think, everyone knows that NFTs had a huge run up in 2021. The celebrities got involved. There was Justin Bieber buying one of the Bored Ape. There was Paris Hilton buying a Bored Ape. And then you had, I don't know, Matt Damon, and everyone was endorsing crypto and NFTs. And then everything crashed in 2022. So that's where we stand now. Honestly, I don't think they're going away. I don't know. I'm obviously not economic, technological prognosticator, but I just think that something like the the tech boom, when the internet started. That really crashed in 2000. And in fact, in preparation for this episode, I saw this just the other day. Let me grab this real quick. This is a headline from the Daily Mail in 2000. It says, "Internet may be just a passing fad as millions give up on it." So I'm not saying NFTs are going to be the future. I'm not saying they're not. I'm saying nobody knows. So it's worth looking at now, and they're still worth quite a bit right now. And insureds are still having NFT losses regularly.
So it can be just an alternative investment, and it's wise to diversify your portfolio, Tim. So you never know.
Sure. People invest in wine and watches and everything under the sun. Why not NFTs?
Wait,
Here, here.
sneakers.
Sneakers, yeah.
All right, so it's not just a fad. It could be a fad. You never know what's going to happen. But we're talking about something digital, which isn't physical. How do we tie that in?
Yeah, is that
policy?
property? Yeah,
Oh, good question. Good question. So this is like when we talked about with COVID, that's the first question we always ask is there a direct physical loss? Ooh, that's a hard one here. On the one hand, it's really just what is a computer file? It's a pattern of information. It's a pattern of ones and zeros that's residing on a microchip until the charge changes. It's hard to say that there's too much physical about that. The microchip is physical, but the information on it, maybe not. On the other hand, I would argue that we are now living in a world where everything is being digitized. And usually the goal with what we do on computers is to replicate things that are physical in the real world. So we're talking to each other right now. Mike, I'm actually looking at my screen and I'm looking at a bunch of pixels on it. Alicia, I'm looking at you, but for all intents and purposes, that we are having a conversation with each other right now. So I would say that there's so much blending of the physical and the digital that it's getting harder to make this distinction. There are 3 cases I'm aware of in just the last year or two.
Wow.
Where a federal district court held against coverage for cryptocurrency, Alicia, based on exactly what you just brought up. They said it's not a physical loss, it's just information. Now, this statement will be out of date within a year, I guarantee it, but it is interesting that that's how courts have gone so far. But you could say the same thing about money. We've talked about money in account funds. That's just information on the bank ledger, but we have no problem calling that a physical loss.
Yeah.
So maybe it just is going to take people getting more used to the idea of the digital world mimicking the physical world.
Yeah. And there is a little difference, I guess, because it is, like you said, almost like a piece of art, even though it's a piece of digital art, and if it's shared or if it's stored on blockchain that you didn't want to talk about, but that might be something else too, that kind of almost like keeping something in a safe that is physical property. So
right, and it does make sense. I concede on the risk of loss is completely different between the two. So something in a safe is in a safe, and something on Google's servers somewhere or Amazon's servers is on their servers. It's just a different risk profile.
Yeah.
So at least in that sense, it does make a little bit sense. It makes some sense to treat them somewhat differently.
And I guess my other question would come up, and it's, again, I was a property person way back in the day, and I remember there was these special limits of liability, Tim, that tried to kind of limit coverage of things that were kind of hard to quantify, like cash and jewelry and furs and stuff like that, that sometimes would pop up as something that was limited under the policy. Is there anything that applies to these NFTs?
Well, let's pull out our homeowners policy. This is the ISO HO003 0322. This is the new one from last year.
All right.
Special limits of liability.
Yeah.
First one, money. No.
Oh.
Banknotes, bullion, gold, silver, platinum, coins, metal, scripts, stored
all the
value
stuff I
cards,
keep in my
smart
house?
cards.
All the
I would
things you
say
keep under your mattress, Alicia. Yes, we know.
I would say none of those.
All right.
The only other one that's relevant is the next list: securities, accounts, deeds, evidences of debt, letters of credit, notes other than bank notes, manuscripts, personal records, passports, tickets, and stamps. Well, you could make an argument. It doesn't sound to me like any of those are particularly on point, but a lot of those are kind of vague and who knows what they mean. So you
Yeah.
can go ahead and make that argument. I just don't know that everyone would buy that argument.
And there hasn't been any case law that's looked at it and said NFTs don't meet the
No,
definition of these things, or
no,
do.
not, there
Okay.
have been no case law about NFTs under these special limits.
Well, that's exciting. It's something to look forward though to, right, Tim?
Yeah, and of course the effect of that would be potentially, if it ends up being a covered loss, you'd go all the way up to the coverage C limits then, because you don't have any of these special limits to cap the
That apply.
loss.
Ouch, potentially.
Potentially.
Mm.
So anything, do you know, Tim, is anybody doing anything to maybe update the old special limits of liability to bring them up to the modern phase with stuff like Bitcoin and NFTs? Anything out there percolating in the business that you're aware of?
Absolutely, yes.
Ah,
So we've seen exclusions for virtual currency
Hmm.
way back. I would say even around 2015, I was seeing them in crime forms. They didn't make their way into homeowners policies until this brand new one, the 0322 edition of ISO's H03. But we have a new provision now. So this is property not covered. This is not a special limit.
okay.
This is property not covered, meaning you get no coverage at all. And the property not covered provision says, excuse me while I pull it up, virtual currency of any kind by whatever name known, whether actual or fictitious, including but not limited to digital currency, cryptocurrency, or any type of electronic currency.
So still, I think we'd get a question here. Is this currency or is it more similar to art? So
Correct. Correct. I would say that the way this is worded, it talks about digital currency, cryptocurrency, electronic currency. Currency is something usually that is a generally accepted medium of exchange where everything, every item in that set is as good as any other item in that set. A dollar bill is a dollar bill. A penny is a penny. They're all the same. A Bitcoin is a Bitcoin. But NFTs are different. The whole point of NFTs is that you can have one unique item that's not like any other item. And that generally wouldn't be a currency because they'd all be valued differently. There are open markets where these NFTs are traded. So there are bids and asks and spreads, and usually you can narrow it down to a range, especially if a piece is in a bigger collection. You can see how much other pieces in that collection have sold for recently, and you can get a pretty good idea of how much that NFT would be valued for at ACV. Back in your days as an adjuster, did you ever have anything like this? Maybe a piece of art or maybe something else where it was just hard to find the valuation for it?
Yeah, I would say I didn't have too many homes that I went into that had fine pieces of art, but you'd have folks that would make that argument at times. It's something that they had that they couldn't really sometimes even support that they had, but it was a antique that was of great value or artwork that was of great value or that was passed down through the family through generations. And yeah, so how do you come up with a value of that? Well, at least for me as an adjuster, it's always wise to know when you don't know. And if this is outside of your area of expertise, that's definitely the time you want to get somebody in that maybe does art evaluation for a living. And oftentimes the insured would get their expert too. So sometimes it would get down to the experts talking through it and trying to figure out what was the value at the time of loss. You know, everybody's going to argue that, hey, it was going to appreciate over time. So yeah, there was just a lot of nuances to trying to evaluate these items. So that's definitely where you want to get your experts involved, make sure they're truly experts in evaluation, which is the other thing that sometimes would pop up, that folks claim to be experts but had no real experience in it. So vetting your experts, getting the right one to help you come up with that valuation, to me, is the tip as an adjuster. Know when you don't know something, go find out somebody who does, make sure they're vetted and appropriate, and then use your experts.
Yeah, and just from a broader perspective, I would say the more policy language we can have to be as clear as we can with this brand new asset class, the easier it's going to be for us as claims professionals to understand what we as insurance companies intended to do and how to handle these losses.
Right.
So Tim, what is the takeaway from this scenario?
The insured had $500,000 worth of NFTs stolen. The NFTs were part of a collection that traded freely on the internet and have a relatively established market value. Is this a covered loss under a standard homeowner's form? I would say NFTs are probably personal property under coverage C, and theft is a named peril. So if the policy doesn't have an exclusion for NFTs or some other way of describing NFTs, the question ultimately is going to come down to whether a court considers that to be a direct physical loss of that digital property. Recently, some courts have disfavored calling it a direct physical loss, but it's still very much an open question. The policy does have a whole host of special limits for securities and other similar terms, but it's not clear those limits would apply to an NFT. And my final takeaway would be, as always, the clearer the policy language, the less chances of a coverage dispute down the road.
All right. And Mike, what's your takeaway?
My takeaway is, like Tim said, make sure we're keeping up our policy language with what's going on in the modern world out there today with all these things, because as Tim mentioned, a lot of these special limits of liability were the same ones that I was dealing with when I started my job as an adjuster. Oh geez, Pete, nearly 30 some odd plus years ago. So maybe update that, but it would be interesting too to see what the courts decide, both on direct physical loss as well as what is property. Is it personal property? Sounds like it is, but that might be another area too. Who knows?
Well, I'm going to go look up a digital NFT for music, see if I can get some royalties.
There you go.
So if I'm an adjuster who wants to know more, Tim, where can I go?
PLRB members can go to plrb.org and access our database of legal materials. We have written recently about coverage questions about NFTs and cryptocurrencies and Bitcoins and direct physical loss and everything we talked about today. So for an adjuster who has some questions about these things, plrb.org would be a great start for you.
Mike, is there anywhere else we can go?
Well, you can always go under the education tab, see what we have. I do know we had a cool webinar, I think maybe last year, that was on these, at the time, Bitcoin miners, like the actual computing power that has to go through all those problems and try to solve in order to mine a Bitcoin. And they claimed that all their high-end equipment was stolen. So how do you evaluate that and the Bitcoins that allegedly went with it? So I think it was called the Great Bitcoin Caper. That might be worth watching if you're looking for something. But always check us out under the education tab. We always have great stuff there.
And if you like this episode, tap the subscribe button and rate us 5 stars. So, Mike, Tim, until next time, guys.
All right, we'll see you next time.
See you, everybody.
The views and opinions expressed in this resource are those of the individual speaker and not necessarily those of the Property and Liability Resource Bureau, its membership, or any organization with which the presenter is employed or affiliated. The information, ideas, and opinions are presented as information only and not as legal advice or offers of representation. Individual policy language and state laws vary, and listeners should rely on guidance from their companies and counsel as appropriate.